I'd like to call to order the Hatfield Township Board of Commissioners conditional use hearing continuation dated June 24th, 2024. Roll call, please.
President Zipfel.
Here.
Vice President Rogers.
Here.
Commissioner Andrus.
Here.
Commissioner Lestracco.
Here.
Commissioner Partha.
Here. I'd like to ask Commissioner Andrus if he would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. Okay, we don't normally have meetings that are just singular issues, so we're just going to jump right into it because everybody knows why we're here, and it's a continuation of the hearing from, I guess, May 22nd. So we need a motion to go into the hearing? Okay, well then I'll open the hearing. Conditional use application, Pulte Homes of PA Limited Partnership for 336 Orvilla Road, continued from May 22nd. The hearing is open.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kristen Pianzio. I'm the solicitor for the board. I see the applicant's counsel is seated, so special counsel for the township. Julie, you were up with your next witness. I believe it's your traffic engineer.
That is correct, and I'm going to hand out exhibit booklets first.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Affirmative testimony about the case. Thank you.
Matt, what is your profession?
Professional engineer specializing in traffic and transit.
And do you hold any professional licenses and registrations?
I do. I hold a professional engineer license in Commonwealth.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Traffic Planning Design as Executive Vice President.
And how long have you been employed in that capacity?
I've been employed by Traffic Planning Design for over 29 years.
And what are your professional duties?
I oversee the private division is responsible for the preparation of traffic studies, designs, and the like associated with.
And have you prepared transportation impact assessments and studies for residential developments?
I have
Approximately how many?
over 100.
And briefly, what's your educational background?
Received a civil engineering from Drexel University.
That mic is really bad. I don't think it's you. I think it's the microphone. But Matt, if you can get even closer, or maybe
Want me to put this in the middle?
yours is great. So
The button is on.
that's good. Just stay there.
Is that better? Close. Hello? Okay. Maybe that would be better. Is that better?
Julie, if you want to go on with his qualifications, I don't mind, but I know you want to offer him as an expert in the field of traffic planning and design, or,
Traffic engineering, planning, and design.
okay, I mean, I would suggest that we accept him in that capacity. He's testified for applicants that I know. I've seen him qualified numerous times. Do you have any objection, Mr. Panzer?
Not have any objection to the offer as an expert.
So we'll accept him as an expert in that field.
And I would just have him identify his resume, his CV,
Okay.
which is Exhibit A13 in the exhibit booklet. Will you identify that, please?
Yes, that is a copy of my.
And Matt, were you and Transportation Planning and Design engaged by the applicant with regard to this conditional use application?
Yes, we were.
And what was the scope of that engagement?
The scope of the engagement was to evaluate the proposed site and development from a traffic perspective.
And you had mentioned that you have, that you've prepared transportation impact assessments and studies for residential developments, and you did so for this development as well, correct?
That is correct.
So just basically, as an overview, what are traffic impact assessments and studies?
A traffic impact assessment / study is essentially a study or analysis conducted on a defined area as it relates to a specific use or development on the surrounding roadway network.
And as part of that, you review access points as well, is that correct?
Correct. We review access points, the layout of the proposed development, and posed as part of the development.
And for this particular application, have you visited the property and the surrounding roadways?
I have.
And what are the existing conditions of the property in terms of points of access? And I think I'd ask you to put up Exhibit A8, please, on the screen, so Matt can refer to that.
First one. So referring to Exhibit A8 on the screen, along the top of that exhibit, along the top of that aerial, is Leon Drive. Currently, as it exists, top of the exhibit, as I'm pointing, Exhibit A8 Drive in this area here. Currently, there are two access stubs. Drive, which extends southerly from property line of the subject property. There was also an additional stub slightly west of Grapevine Drive, which also provides roadway access, which terminates.
And is there also an access easement at the southeastern portion of the property?
Correct. At the southeastern portion of the property, there's an access easement that extends out from west to east, out to Orvilla Road.
And the access points that you mentioned, Buckthorn Drive and Grapevine Drive, those access points, as you mentioned, stub right directly into the property, is that correct?
That's correct.
And are there sidewalks on those properties that lead directly into the property?
I believe along Grapevine Drive, there is a sidewalk. As far as Buckthorn Drive is concerned, I don't recall off the top of my head if there's a sidewalk on both sides of the road or one side of the road that extend down towards the subject property line, but there are sidewalks present within the area.
And did you evaluate existing traffic conditions at or near this site?
Yes, we did conduct evaluation of the existing traffic conditions in and around the site, concentrating on 4 specific intersections. Those intersections, the intersection of Orvilla Road and Leon Drive, which is off of this plan, right. We also looked at the intersection of Kofel Road and Sourwood Drive, which is, again, off this exhibit, but to the northeast of the subject property. Section of Orvilla Road and Kofel Road, as well as the intersection of Grapevine Drive and Leon Drive.
And did you prepare transportation impact assessment for the single-family detached dwelling cluster development?
Yes, we did.
And is that Exhibit A14 of the exhibit booklet?
Yes, dated June 20th, 2024, entitled Beach Palo Residential Development Transportation Impact Assessment.
And would you please discuss in detail the transportation impact assessment that you conducted?
Sure. So as with any sort of traffic analysis or traffic study conducted, there are a number of different aspects that we look at, again, from a traffic perspective. As mentioned, we look at the existing traffic conditions, obviously, roadways surrounding the property, Orvilla Road, Kofel Road, Leon Drive, Sourwood Road, or Sourwood Drive, Brighton Drive. Look at the existing traffic conditions at those intersections. We look at existing pedestrian facilities within the area. We look at amount of traffic some of these roads are currently carrying over the course of a day, whether there's any scheduled roadway improvements in the area which may affect the subject development. Crash history, intersections in question, at mass transit in the area, effect on things of that nature.
And can you briefly run through each of those items that you just discussed that are detailed in your traffic impact assessment?
Sure. So within Exhibit A14, there are a number of different items contained within the study. We looked at, as I mentioned, the existing roadway network, Villa Road, Kofel Road, Sourwood Drive, Leon Drive, Grapevine Drive, existing bicycle and pedestrian facilities within those areas, nearest mass transit facilities, and whether, again, that would have an effect on the subject property. We also looked at crash history within those subject intersections based on reportable crashes that may have occurred in subsequent 5 years. Also, as I mentioned, conducted traffic counts at those subject intersections, which I mentioned earlier. Excuse me, those counts were conducted during the AM and PM hours of traffic. Typical weekday, conducted on Thursday, March 7th. Traffic counts are conducted between 7 and 9 a.m. Peak 1 hour of traffic within those peaks, or the analysis going forward within the study. We also looked at, excuse me, just general growth in traffic within the area. Obviously, there are certain developments which may or may not have an effect on the subject roadways, but there's also just general growth in traffic based on statistics. That's called the basically the growth rates over the last 9 years, those growth rates to determine the amount of traffic growth that may occur in a time period we feel. I mentioned we looked at scheduled roadway improvements or any roadway improvements done by the township, by the county, by PennDOT that could have effect on the surrounding network. Next step is to look at the amount of traffic the subject development will generate. We utilize industry standard publications through the Script Generation Manual, which is a compilation of actual studied developments to determine the amount of traffic that this site generate in the future. We then distribute those trips throughout the roadway network to determine the impact the development may have on the roadway network. Conduct analysis and look at how the intersections currently operate, how they'll operate in the future, and how they operate in the future with the subject development being constructed. That analysis is called level of service, and those level of service is a way for us as engineers, traffic engineers, to determine how an intersection may operate. Analysis basically goes from level service A being best, level service F being. We also look at the queues in the area. How does traffic operate and do with respect to the stacking of vehicles at certain intersections. We also look at whether or not certain turn lanes may be necessary for development. Look at the turn lanes, we were more looking at the actual access to the development, more so. It does come into play when we look at how an intersection may operate, whether a certain intersection. Study is really focusing on the access, whether or not a right or left turn lane. Then finally, taking all that into account and looking through all this analysis, we make certain recommendations with respect to the development on potential improvements or potential additional items that could be provided to help traffic more efficiently, but also promote safety through the area.
And using all this analysis, what conclusions did you reach?
The conclusions we reached were that the development of 78 single-family homes would generate approximately 59 new trips during the AM peak hour, about 1 new trip every minute, and 79 new trips during the PM peak hour. When I say trip, I mean one vehicle entering is 1 trip, that same vehicle exiting is another. Course of a day, as study, we project that the development will generate approximately 804 trips, or approximately 400 in the course of a 24-hour period. We also propose certain improvements, obviously one of those being the extension of Grapevine Drive to serve as access to the development. Propose to work with the township and the residents on potential improvements to the pedestrian network that either exist or should be provided for in the future surrounding the proposed development. We also made a recommendation to optimize the traffic signal timing at the intersection of Orvilla Road and Colville Road in order to operating efficiently as can be. And also work with the township and the residents on any potential traffic calming measures which could be implemented through development, whether that be on Penfield Drive, Brighton Drive, Leon Drive, or Sourwood Drive.
You provide a little bit more detail on the access points in terms of, for example, will there be a stop sign located at Grapevine?
So right now at the intersection of Grapevine and Leon, both approaches of Leon Drive are stop controlled at Grapevine. So right now, while it is a 4-way intersection, on the south side of Leon Drive, there are only 2 residential homes serviced by the southern leg of Grapevine Drive. So right now, Grapevine Drive has the right-of-way, whereas stop controlled. We would propose to evaluate the intersection of Leon Drive and Grapevine Drive as a 4-way, all-way stop, so that both south legs of the intersection are stopped in addition to. That would be something that we would evaluate the need for current operation of that intersection.
And when leaving the development, traveling on Grapevine, would there be a stop sign at that location?
There would be a stop sign at the intersection of Leon Drive and Grapevine Drive. Correct, that is the proposal.
Okay, and in your professional opinion as an expert in traffic engineering, planning, and design, does the proposed single-family detached dwelling cluster development as designed provide ingress and egress so as to minimize traffic congestion on the public streets?
Yes, in my opinion.
And can you explain the basis for that opinion?
Sure. So it was obvious to me at the onset of this project that at some point in the past, based on my experience and based on my opinion, at some point in the past when the neighborhood of Leon Drive was being designed and proposed, there was thought or consideration given to providing access to this subject property. Reason that's my opinion is the fact that there are two existing stubs that extend from Leon Drive down south to the property line, that being Vine Drive stub, Buckthorn Drive stub. Again, in my opinion, someone had the 70s or 80s when some of these were constructed to think about providing access to this property. So utilizing those access points, in my opinion, is appropriate. Minimizes the potential for additional access points, conflict points, not only within the neighborhood, but other neighborhood roadways.
And those two access points, in addition to the access easement that goes out to Orvilla Road, those are the only access points for this property, is that correct?
Correct. There's one vehicular access for everyday use. Proposed emergency access points, one being Buckthorn Drive and one being at the southeast corner of the property accessing Orvilla Road.
And in your professional opinion, as an expert in traffic engineering, planning, and design, will the proposed development, if constructed, in any way adversely impact or be detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the community in terms of traffic-related issues?
No, with the caveat that the recommendations that were included within the traffic study, Exhibit A14, are implemented in conjunction with the proposed development.
And in your professional opinion, as an expert in traffic engineering, planning, and design, will this proposed single-family detached dwelling cluster development, if constructed, cause any greater traffic impact than what is normally generated from a single-family detached dwelling cluster development use?
No, as I mentioned, we used information and data to determine the amount of traffic that would be generated by the subject.
That's all I have of this witness.
Tom?
You. So, Mr. Hammond, was I to understand that TPD, or Traffic Planning and Design, has essentially two sides of the house, one municipal, one private?
They do have two sides of the house, one private and one that's more than municipal, what I like to term as public. That public side services municipalities, but also counties, DOTs, and Turnpike.
And you're the vice president responsible for the private side, yes?
That's correct.
So you spend your time representing developers as opposed to municipalities, yes?
Correct.
Okay. You indicated that you did perform traffic counts. When I say you, at your direction, traffic counts were taken, correct?
That's correct.
And was that using a manual methodology?
No, that was utilizing MyoVision technology.
You had a camera out there.
Correct.
You also, in calculating the number of trips, used the ITE manual, yes?
Yes.
The ITE manual has a formula within which you plug in the data and it spits out the number of trips either for peak or daily. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So what is that formula?
So the formula is based on a number of different variables depending on the use. Type of development would be based on the number of residential units. Top of that, the area which those residential units are proposed.
So if that were the simplest aspect of the formula, it would be number of units times area they take up.
So you can utilize either equations or rates. So when the data is collected and it's compiled, ITE usually gives methodologies to calculate. Generation associated with a development, we look at both methodologies and higher of the two. I would point out that this is essentially equations of the rates, but utilizing actually required as part of the preparation of a traffic study.
And the use in question that we're defining is a single-family residential use, right?
Correct.
Use 10, 215?
210.
210, use 210. So in this case, the applicant is proposing 78 dwelling units. So you start with 78 dwelling units, and then you plug in the other data, and out spits 804 trips per weekday.
Correct.
Weekday. So were you to reduce the number of dwelling units, that number 804 would reduce using the formula.
Correct. And if you increase the number of units at 804.
And this 804 trips per day is 804 new trips, right?
Correct. So this type of use, depending on the uses, there's essentially two types of traffic associated. Various uses, pass-by trips. This development, residential units are 100% new trips, so that's all new traffic that's added to the roadway network.
So when you talk about pass-through, if you were testifying for Wawa, you might say a bunch of these trips are people that were going from point A to point B. Wawa happens to be in the middle. They peel off, go to Wawa, get a coffee, leave. That's not a new trip. That's a pass-through trip.
Correct.
But these are new trips.
Correct.
And new trips have an impact on the existing roadway structure, yes?
Yes, they do.
And in part, that's why the TIS or TIA is required as part of land use and land development, land planning, right?
Correct, and I believe in the specific case of Hatfield Township, traffic study is required. 20 or more units generates, I believe, hour trips, part of.
Now, you talked about the various access points for this 42 gross acre property, but the only regularly scheduled vehicular access to the site comes through Grapevine Drive, correct?
Correct.
Buckthorn stub is proposed for either emergency access or open space, right?
I believe, my understanding, it's proposed for emergency access.
And so all the traffic is going, as proposed on this plan, A8, is going in and out of Grapevine.
Correct.
Now, you also talked about this easement to the southern corner between Orvilla Road and the southeast property line.
Yes.
Have you reviewed that easement?
I have not reviewed the documentation with respect to that easement, no.
Back to, I couldn't hear you.
That easement.
Thank you.
Is it your understanding that access to and through that easement is not exclusive to the 42-acre parcel?
That is my understanding.
You mentioned that from your professional standpoint, the fact that Buckthorn and Grapevine were stubbed to this parcel means that someone was contemplating development on the 42-acre parcel, right?
Correct.
Which doesn't mean that someone was contemplating 78 units on the parcel. Would you agree with that?
I don't know what that person or persons were contemplating access to the development. Say, though, that whether it's 78 units or the other uses that are allowed within this district, being educational, hospital or nursing home, or religious, municipal use, this property is zoned and was contemplated to be.
Aren't single-family, non-cluster dwellings permitted in this district?
Yes.
So that would be an option.
Correct.
Larger lot size, fewer units on a 42-acre parcel, correct?
That would be the definition.
When preparing a TIS or TIA, isn't it normally the protocol to have discussions with the township?
Depends on your definition of normally. I would say that yes, there are certain instances where discussions are held with the municipality at the onset of the preparation of the traffic study. I would say the majority of those times, those discussions are held due to the fact that as it relates to the preparation of a traffic study. However, in this instance, Hatfield robust section of their ordinance related to traffic impact studies, why they're needed, when they're needed, and how they should be.
Doesn't that dialogue also include the municipality educating the property owner and its professionals on what issues are important to them and the general community based on their knowledge of same?
Those conversations at the onset of the project can revolve around those type items. They can also occur later on in the process through the land development. Plan and the development is further refined.
To that point, your TIS or TIA is actually a starting point, which may morph with plan changes and/or new and additional data, which may impact some of the opinions you provided today.
I would say that it is possible. However, it is unlikely based on the current layout available to the development that there would be any substantial changes with respect to my opinion. That's not to say that there wouldn't be traffic calming that nature, but generally speaking, as I mentioned before, I believe according to the ordinance, the traffic study is not required until the land development application process.
Have you had a discussion with the fire marshal yet?
I have not. I did not personally feel the need to have a discussion with the fire marshal because, as I mentioned before, the access stubs to me were clear that that was the appropriate location for access, and that at some point in the past, access locations to service property.
As far as layout and design, you'd leave that to the general engineer?
Yes, obviously the general engineer at times requests input from the traffic engineer as it relates to internal circulation or layout, but generally speaking, yes.
Those are all the questions I have of Mr. Hammond.
I have a few questions before the board, if that's okay. So, Mr. Hammond, when were you hired by the applicant?
I would just object as to relevance.
Well, I'd like to, if I can give you a little more foundation. I'd like to understand the coordination between your office and Bowler Engineering regarding the design of the development.
If I had to guess, I would say it was part of 2023.
Okay. And when you said you work with the developer's civil engineer for internal circulation, did you and Bowler communicate this together, coming up with this design? Did you have a hand in this?
I don't know that I had a hand necessarily out internally. My expertise the roads, things of that nature. This one, in my opinion, was fairly a lot of where my input comes in.
So not so much the internal circulation and design of the new roads, but the access points and the effect on the surrounding intersections. Is that fair?
Well, it's the access points, the impact on the surrounding intersections, but the access points have a direct correlation.
Right. They have to meet, right? They have to meet the access points, right?
Depending on where you locate those access points could have an effect on how the development.
But in this point, in this case, it's set, like the cake is baked because you already have these stubs in place, and that's really the only way you can get in and out, right?
My opinion, correct, yes.
Right. So that's already set. The internal circulation is designed by Bowler. So basically, your job is to assess what happens after the cars leave the development. Is that fair? Okay. And this application was filed on March 5, and I noticed that the count data that's in the appendices begins on March 7. So you did your analysis after the design was done and the application submitted.
Things that we were tasked in doing. I mentioned we were brought on latter part of 2023 is that looking at the access. Again, as I mentioned, it was pretty straightforward in my opinion of where the access points needed to be located. Matter of Bowler Engineering laying out the site, determining how that would fit in accordance with as the plan progressed and as the layout progressed is when we started to get involved about the
When asked the question about whether or not the design of the development minimizes traffic congestion, you answered yes. That, okay. But they're utilizing the existing access points, so there is no other alternative.
correct. In my opinion, there's no other alternative, but the difference here is that unlike some other developments where you may have a single access point, state road, for instance, or one local road, when you exit the subject development, you have the ability out left and follow out right and drive to get to Colfa Road. Right out. Drive to get to Orvilla Road. So you have multiple ways. Way of a lesser classification to get.
Members, you have questions? Yeah. All right, we're going to take 5 minutes. We'll be back. Okay, we're back on the record. Board members, do you have questions for the witness?
I think we have a few kind of all around. I'll jump in first. Let me ask, have you testified in a Hatfield development before?
I have.
Okay, when, and how long ago? Sorry.
A year to 2 years ago, I testified in relation to Wawa that is currently open.
About any residential developments?
Yes, the adjacent Del Webb development.
Now, you've testified on behalf of, you talked about the two sides of the business, I understand. You testified about, have you testified on behalf of developers before? I'm assuming that's as a part of being engaged by developers. I'm assuming that's a yes, right?
That's a yes.
Okay. Have you ever recommended to them that they need to do a redesign because their design was unsafe?
Multiple times.
And so here, what we have is the data tells us that there's 800, expected anyway, 804 trips from that access point on a daily basis, if I'm reading it correctly, right?
804 trips, correct.
Okay. And that is an acceptable number based on your experience? That's an acceptable number to be coming out of one location during a one-day period of time?
So that's a tough question to answer. Not necessarily just based on my experience, it's based on the analyses that are conducted. Every site is different. Layout of the site, proposed access locations, surrounding roadways, all of those come into play when you look at the viability of an access point, viability of the traffic as it relates to that proposed use. So the traffic study is a tool that we utilize to determine whether or not there are existing conditions that require us to look at mitigating, whether there's future conditions as a result of the development that we need to take into account that also require certain improvements, certain mitigation provided. There are many, many instances, many developments that I've looked at that, depending on the layout and depending on the use, I have recommended against, whether it's the access or whether it's the layout. But it's as a result of some of the experience that I've had over my 29 years, but also the analysis conducted.
So during your testimony, you mentioned that you'll work with residents in Township and perhaps evaluate, I think you said Koffel or Villa and traffic calming devices. Does that mean, currently you're saying it's safe, this design works. When you go through and do that work with the Township intersections and so forth, what does that mean? Does that mean if you find something, you're going to participate, you're committed to making exactly
Sure.
the line drawn with it?
And just to clarify, it wasn't work with the township and residents on Caulfield Road or Villa Road. I think in relation to that intersection.
Yes,
I
intersection,
talked
yep.
about the signal retiming of that intersection, optimizing how that signal currently operates to make it work as efficiently as it can. But in regards to the recommendation I made about working with the township and residents on not only pedestrian facilities, but also potential traffic calming measures, what I mean by that is essentially to solicit input from the township and from the surrounding residents to determine if there's some appropriate measure of traffic calming that could be provided for immediately surrounding the development, or it's on Leon Drive, Sourwood. Those neighborhood streets that would help alleviate some of the concerns that have been expressed to date.
So whatever those recommendations might be, who flips the bill for that?
So I think the recommendation is that we work with the township and the residents to determine the appropriate level, if at all, of any traffic calming measures or pedestrian facilities. But typically, when I make those recommendations in my study, those are recommendations for the developer.
So let me ask on that point. Is your opinion that this design is safe with the expectation that those mitigating circumstances and the other items, the other traffic calming efforts will be done?
It's not, it's based on working with the township to determine if Traffic calming measures could be provided for. It's not, that doesn't change my opinion as to the subject development and the safety of the operation based on the analysis that was conducted.
So if none of those calming, traffic calming methods or other adjustments that you've described is actually done, your opinion is still that it's safe?
So I made 4 specific recommendations. One recommendation was obviously to extend the current stub at Grapevine Drive to serve as the access point to the development. That is necessary, obviously, as a result of this development. That is something that needs to be implemented. The other recommendation I made was to retime the traffic signal at Orvilla Road and Colfa Road. That is something that needs to happen as a result of this development. The other 2 recommendations, working with the township and the residents on pedestrian facilities and traffic calming measures, were to address some of the concerns that has been raised by the township and the residents with respect to their perception of the development and the traffic associated with the development. So if there's an agreement that can be struck, if there are certain improvements that the residents would like to see that relate to traffic calming would help them feel better about the additional traffic being added to the neighborhood streets, then we would participate. But that doesn't change my opinion as to the viability of the development and whether it's safe or not.
So the first 2 recommendations are needs to happen type instances, right?
Correct.
Okay. And who pays for those?
Developer.
Now this is a traffic assessment. This is not a traffic study, correct?
So a traffic assessment and a traffic study are essentially the same thing. The difference between the assessment and the study is just really the area of influence. Traffic assessment, according to PennDOT standards, basically looking at the development itself and the immediately surrounding adjacent intersections, which we have gone, in my opinion, above and beyond that criteria with respect to what's been provided in Exhibit A14. A traffic study is a much more robust look at traffic on a larger area. There are criteria with respect to what defines a traffic assessment versus a traffic study with respect to that study area. And we exceed, let me put it this way, we have gone above and beyond in Exhibit A14 the thresholds for a traffic assessment versus a traffic study.
So here as a conditional use application, traffic study is not typically necessary, but an assessment is necessary in the circumstance because the developer needs to meet a certain standard of safety. And that's why they engaged you to perform the study, to be able to articulate yes or no whether it's a safe design. Is that a fair description?
So there are certain requirements set forth in the township ordinances relating to conditional use standards. A traffic assessment or traffic study needs to be completed for me to sit here and provide my opinion based on those analyses. But again, the difference between the assessment and the study is just really the area of influence that you end up looking at. The contents within that study are essentially the same. If I put a traffic study and a traffic assessment in front of you right now, you would not notice the difference in terms of what's contained within those documents. The only difference you would note is that there may be additional intersections that are analyzed further out, but that's also based on the size of the development and the amount of traffic generated.
So I'm quite confused right now. This is an assessment. Forward, at some point, a study will be required?
No.
No, okay, so this
This would be the document that would be submitted as part of land development application.
Not going to go further out in terms of a bigger radius for impact other signal devices?
They are not.
I want to go back just for a second because we were talking about 804 trips in a day. And I know you gave me the example of, well, there's no magic number because you have to take into consideration a lot of different things, access points, the surrounding area, all the different things that you as an expert would take into consideration. So let's focus on this location. Is 1,000 trips too many at this site?
Without conducting the analysis, I don't know that I can give you an answer on what's too much. I will tell you that the surrounding roadways which this site will take access from and to, and what I mean by that is, again, Leon Drive, Sourwood, Brighton, Penfield, those roadways do not currently experience a significant amount of traffic, in my opinion. Relatively low traffic generators in that area. I would also point out that if you took that whole development, all those 4 streets, out, again, Grapevine, Sourwood, Leon, Enfield, Brighton, about 130 homes or so within that area, give or take. But if you look at the amount of traffic that's generated through that neighborhood, especially within the area fronting development, there's not a significant amount of traffic that occurs during those peak hours. So I couldn't give you an exact number of the threshold that would create unsafe conditions, because it's not necessarily that it's unsafe. It's just a matter of what may be needed to mitigate the impact of the development. So one of the safety items that we typically look at is site distance. You have the appropriate site distance entering and exiting the driveway. In this instance, we do. Through an existing 3/4-way intersection. But in terms of the impact the development has, it's a matter of, are there mitigating measures, turn lanes, widening of roadways, and things of that nature that could help improve the operation of the traffic through the area.
You understand our dilemma. We're sitting here as judges trying to figure out if this is a safe design, right? I mean, that's our role, that's our responsibility. You're the expert who's supposed to articulate it. You've said that 804 on a daily basis is safe. It meets whatever threshold as experts you determine to be appropriate. I need to know what's too much so that I can gauge whether is it 900, is it 850 trips? I don't know where, and I'm not looking for a specific number. I need an expert to tell me what's the number of trips before it no longer is a design that's safe enough to meet the standard that is necessary for this developer to get their application approved. If you're not able to give me a number or give me an estimate, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But that's one of the considerations that we have as decision makers.
I don't know that I have been asked previously to determine the number of trips that would trigger or that would determine the site to be unsafe. We look at the amount of traffic the site generates and whether or not it can function appropriately and safely, which is what we've shown in Exhibit A14. I would point out, if it does help, that under your zoning ordinance, Chapter 282, under Article 5, under the RA1 residential district, there are uses are allowed via special exception that would generate more traffic than what's being proposed as part of the subject development. I can't tell you how much, because it would require a layout to be done and determined to meet criteria, impervious setbacks, things of that nature. But there are uses, like I said, educational. There's hospital, nursing home, depending on the size of the nursing home, could generate more traffic. There's religious uses. Granted, the religious uses not necessarily operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but they do tend to have significant amounts of traffic during certain times of the week, and a lot of these resident or religious uses are actually increasing their offerings, whether it's daycare, whether it's school, whether those type of things, which would all be allowed via special exception, but would generate more traffic likely subject development.
Special exceptions requirement the board has to approve?
Correct.
I think you were asked by your counsel whether you went to the site. Is that correct?
That's correct.
When you were there, you were obviously looking at the primary access point, correct? Were there children in the area? Were they playing there?
I've been there a handful of times. I've driven out through the entire neighborhood. Again, Penfield, Brighton, Grapevine, Apple Blossom, Leon, Sourwood. And I have seen many residents out taking care of their properties, whether it's mowing, that nature. I've seen kids, I've seen people walking through the neighborhood. I haven't seen kids necessarily playing in the street, but I also haven't observed a significant amount of traffic Quite frankly, the last 2 times I was there, I may have, in the course of a half an hour, driving through the neighborhood and stopping and looking at things, may have seen maybe 5 vehicles traveling through that area.
Is that rush hour traffic or like what time?
About 6 o'clock at night.
So my question, though, is if this area is known to be a concentration where kids congregate, does that play any factor into your assessment at all?
It does, and I think that would, I think it plays into my assessment as it relates to pedestrian facilities, making sure that these appropriate pedestrian facilities. I don't necessarily take into account whether or not kids are playing in the street. That's not something necessarily that, from a traffic perspective, that we condone. Kids playing in the street, not saying it doesn't happen, but not something that would necessarily take into account.
So what portion of this report, and I know it's just, it was shared with us this evening as Exhibit 14, what portion of this report takes into consideration whether kids congregate in that area or not?
There is no
That
portion,
area meaning the point of, the primary point of access.
there is no portion of the study that talks about children congregating at or near the access point. In the counts that were conducted, not only were traffic volumes recorded, but also pedestrian volumes were recorded as well.
So let me, and I'm sorry if I'm asking a similar question of what I did a couple of questions ago, but is there a certain number of children or is there a certain expectation of congregation of children in a particular area that then has an impact on your decision-making when you write an assessment such as this?
I'm going to ask you to clarify that. When you say children congregating, what does that mean exactly? Do you mean children playing in the street?
Well, not necessarily in the street, but even on the sidewalk or right, some of those folks, it's their front lawn. So, in the area.
I'm just trying to, I'm trying to equate what you're saying with how that would impact traffic on the roadways if kids are playing in their yard or walking on a sidewalk.
That's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is whether if this is an area where there's, some neighborhoods have few kids or no kids. Maybe it's a 55 and older community. Leon Drive is not a 55 and older community. There are children in the area. My question to you is whether if there are children known to be either to play in their front lawn or on the sidewalks or ride their bikes in that area, does that have any impact on your assessment?
So what does have an impact on the assessment, depending on the amount, is the pedestrian volume. And there's no difference from a traffic perspective whether they're children or they're adults. So if there's a significant amount of pedestrian volume in an area,
Right.
then we would absolutely take that into account.
Is that taken into the assessment that we're looking at here?
It is not, and that is due to the fact that based on the counts that were conducted on March 7th, those counts, why I talked about the counts being conducted between 7 and 9 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m.
Right.
day to assess the peaks. We actually record data for 12 hours. We record from 6:30 in the morning to 6:30 in the afternoon. Or 6:30. Through that time, for instance, at the intersection of Grapevine Drive and Leon Drive, there were a total of 21 pedestrians over the course of 12 hours that accessed that intersection. 4 in the AM peak, 6 in the PM peak. So while there was pedestrian activity and while there's pedestrian activity expected through that neighborhood, it didn't rise to the level that it needed to be necessarily addressed through the traffic study.
Okay, so what you just cited is notes that you have or actually in the report?
It's actually in the report. So within the appendices, appendix
Or page number?
Appendix B,
Appendix
to be
B.
exact, manual traffic count printouts. That's the actual raw data that we collected for those 12-hour periods at those 4 intersections I mentioned. And it breaks the information down into the peaks in the AM, each of those 4 locations.
You did a physical count or you did electronic count?
Electronic counts.
Pedestrians, how did you identify pedestrian versus car, just by speed they're traveling?
No, it's actually the latest technology for conducting traffic counts, pedestrian counts, whatever. What's called the MyoVision technology, where it's actually a video recording, and it records whether it's a vehicle and where that vehicle is coming from as well as pedestrians. It's very similar to cameras that are put up on traffic signals.
Yeah, actually I have a video image for that 2-hour duration, and someone then sits there and assesses that video and does the manual.
Not necessarily. Not in this circumstance. At times, people have gone through the video and actually looked at it, but the technology is such that it determines the amount of vehicular and pedestrian traffic and provides that information to you.
The reliability of that, accuracy of that is,
All I can say is I can't give you the exact percentage. I would say it's been accepted by municipality and DOT that we've worked with. I'm sure it's gone, my understanding, it's gone through rigorous reviews in order to allow its use, not only as part of a traffic study, but it's also the same technology that's utilized, again, at traffic signals, camera on the traffic signal.
Matt, I'm looking at, you said Appendix B, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
you
no,
mind?
I can't find it.
So I see in the center of each of those graphs, the words lights, other vehicles, pedestrians. Where, is there supposed to be a number next to those? And because there's no number, I don't understand where the data is. Could
That's
you
just a
show me?
key. That's just a key. So,
Where's
so
that
if you look
pedestrian
at
count?
what I'm in the top right corner, what intersection are you looking at?
First page beyond the tab that says Appendix B.
Okay, sure.
The upper right says One Orvilla Road and Leon Drive, Wyndham Way.
Second page?
Yeah.
Yes. So what that shows is that's the key, right? So lights, other vehicles and pedestrian. Lights are typical cars, pickup trucks. Other vehicles would be UPS, larger trucks, and then pedestrians. So all that is a key. So what you do is you look at the top part of that four-way intersection where the top says Orvilla Road, SB, southbound. Out in total is the next line.
Right.
Yes, I see that.
So the next line after that is the total number of lights, vehicles.
Oh, I see. Those
The
three
next-
rows are the same 3 rows in that same order. So the top row is lights, the next row is other vehicles, and the next row is pedestrians.
Yes, ma'am.
I see.
And that's same for each approach of the intersection.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, so then that key corresponds to each of the locations throughout Exhibit Appendix B.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a copy of the Hatfield Township Act 209 study?
I do not.
Have you I'm not saying with you have it now. Have you reviewed that as a part of your assessment?
I don't know that I have. I don't have the answer to that right now.
Okay, so you have not spoken to our traffic engineer as a part of your assessment, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so you are unfamiliar with what the traffic engineer, what the township's anticipated improvements at various intersections will be or is anticipated to be in the future, correct?
Not necessarily. Based on, well, I'm not aware of any specific improvements proposed immediately surrounding the development.
Okay.
The intersection of Orvilla Road and Colville Road, my opinion, is what we would classify as an off-site intersection, and if the township had proposed improvements there, that would be subject to the impact fee paid associated with the development.
So you named one intersection that you assume we have plans for. Other intersections in the area, you're not able to tell us what the impact of these homes and the 804 trips in a day would have on those areas, given the improvements that are anticipated.
So what I would say is that during the course of the peak hours, which Township's impact fee ordinance is based on the number of new trips during the PM peak hour,
Right?
development, as I testified to earlier, generates 79 new PM peak hour trips.
Plan on
Can you-
paying the fee, not doing improvements. Is that your testimony?
I might get there. So, so it generates 79 PM peak hour trips.
Right.
The typical threshold, and I talked to her earlier about assessment versus study, is if a development generates than 100 peak hour trips, that intersection should be included within your traffic analysis. Obviously, we don't meet the threshold, not even one intersection. Threshold of 100 peak hour trips. So, in my opinion, and based on my experience, the intersections that we need to concentrate on, that we, the traffic engineer and the development team need to concentrate on, are the intersections immediately surrounding development within the neighborhood. Because as I said before, once you exit out Grapevine Drive onto Leon Drive, you have multiple ways for traffic to disperse and get to their ultimate destinations. You have at least 4 separate roadways that you can utilize to get to and from this development before you get to any major roadways. What I mean by major roadways is Colville Road and Orvilla Road. My experience has been is that most municipal impact fee ordinances look at major roadways and do not propose improvements to local residential neighborhood roads. I don't know that I can't say that I've never seen that, but I would be surprised if there were impact fee ordinances put together that showed improvements to local neighborhood roads. Regardless, if we are within the impact fee ordinance zone, we're required to pay the commensurate impact fee based on the 79 new trips that we're adding to the roadway network. Because those intersections of those roadway, Colville Road and Orvilla Road, are located far enough away from the development that traffic has essentially dispersed, then it's not necessarily that we would propose to do any of the improvements within the Act 209. It would be more so that we would pay our impact fee, let the township utilize those funds wherever they felt was most appropriate within the impact fee ordinance area.
Earlier, I swear that you testified that you envisioned retiming. Orvilla and Coffle Road retiming was number 2 out of your 4-step plan. And when you were asked who would do that, you said the developer. But now your testimony is that you're going to pay the fee. Are you going to pay the fee and do the retiming? Or are you now saying you pay the fee and you wouldn't do the retiming?
Pay the fee and do the retiming.
Both.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioners, anyone else have other questions?
Come to the fact that we're saying there's multiple ways out of the development. There's only 2 roads you're going on. Orvilla. That you're taking Orvilla, Coffle north or south. So there's really only 3 intersections that are really going to be impacted. Fill it down and say, just my neighborhood, I'm not impacting much of anything, but they're dispersing to only 3 intersections. Are.
You're dispersing, you're dispersing vis-a-vis 4 neighborhood roadways to 2 other roadways where you can go in multiple directions. So
Tertiary, I call those tertiary roads. They're neighborhood roads.
Sure.
Everyone's got them. You got to get to the major road to get where you want to go.
But I don't know that that's any different than any other development, especially those developments that take direct access to a road like a Colville Road or a Villa Road. So when you're exiting out into a Colville Road or a Villa Road, you're exiting out onto a roadway of higher classification and
Right.
concentrating all of those movements on that roadway. Whereas here, you're dispersing that traffic before it gets to Colville and Orvilla. And if you're coming down Leon, you can make a right or a left on Orvilla Road and continue either the north or south directions. Out on the Colville over 3 separate locations,
Yeah,
give
still
the
on
ability
Colville.
to go north or south, or I'm sorry, east or west. So there's disbursement on those tertiary roads that occurs before you get to those main roadways.
Commissioners, any other questions?
Uh, the one question is like, so you said like 804 trip will be new trip, right? 804 trip. So it will be go through this the Grapevine Drive. It will enter the new community, right? So 804 trip. Did you study like 804 trip if it goes in a single entry point? Um, did you study like we are studying saying in here how it will impact in our separate in our different signals, different exit points, entry points. But when you're talking about the community, the development area, so Great Brine Estate, so we have only one single point of entry, right? So 804 trip, do you think did any study like how it will impact if it is goes through in a single entry?
So the traffic study exhibit A14 specifically looks at just the single entry point for vehicles entering and exiting on Grapevine vis-a-vis the southern stub at Leon Drive.
No, I don't think anything else from the board. I guess now is.
Now it's time for anybody with party status that would like to ask questions. If you could get in line, it would help facilitate it. Let me tell you, I've read the transcripts from the last couple of hearings, and when the stenographer takes testimony, it's really broken up if people talk in the middle of an answer. So, I mean, for everybody in the room, ask the question, pause, get the answer, pause, you know, just try. It's confusing when you read it and it's broken up, so that would help me and I'm sure somebody else. So let's start with your name and
Hi.
your address.
Christy Westover, 1616 Leon Drive. Christy, Kristy, Westover. And what I found to be a critical and directly related intersection that has not yet been mentioned is Orvella and Welsh Road, or 63, which is already disruptively congested during peak hours to the point that it can be several minutes of wait time.
Objection, she's testifying.
I'm trying to
Not
get
asking a
background.
question.
Hang on, hang on. Your question's long, okay? And that's why she's objecting, because it sounds like a statement, but I know at the end you're going to say correct or right, but maybe you could do that a little faster or break it into pieces. That would make it easier.
Sure.
Try to do that.
Was the intersection of Orvella and Welsh Road assessed in light of the proposed increase in traffic?
It was not.
It was not assessed. Is there a plan in place to help alleviate the significant congestion at this location, such as adding a turn lane?
There is not. Based on the traffic study that we did and how we dispersed the traffic through the roadway network, there would be a small amount of the development-related traffic that would access that development, or I'm sorry, access that intersection. And then once it got to that intersection, would travel in multiple directions. There was a question that was posed earlier about the township impact fee. That's a fee that's assessed to developers or developments relating to the amount of new traffic that's added to the roadway network. So assuming that that intersection is recommended for improvements within the Act 209, then the township could utilize the impact fee assessed to this development for improvements at that intersection.
And a separate question, long stretches of Coffle Road and most of Orvilla currently do not have sidewalks for pedestrian use. Is there a plan for adding sidewalks in light of potential increase in pedestrian traffic?
Not at this point, no.
Thank you.
Hi, Donna Bushman, Buschmann, 1648 Leon Drive.
Thank you.
So my understanding with the traffic assessment was done on March 7th, winter time, is that correct?
Technically, the winter, yes, season, yes.
Would there be an opportunity to do a separate one now that it's summer, or maybe even fall, where there's much more pedestrian traffic and children at play?
Would there be an opportunity? Obviously, data can be collected at any time. I don't know that we have a specific proposal to collect any additional traffic at this point. I would note that when the data was collected, it was relatively clear day with a high of about 57 degrees. Again, not super hot, super warm like it's been the last few days and not summer months, but it was obviously not adverse weather at that time period.
So the answer would be no. Not another one.
Technically, we are not proposing to do additional traffic counts, correct?
So the 804 daily trips calculated, since I can't see the data numbers, so I can't really kind of target that, except that the question would be, is that in your formula 2 cars per household?
So it doesn't, we don't look at the number of cars associated with each household. So the data that we utilize is based on actual traffic counts conducted at similar type uses. So for instance, I was asked earlier a question about the land use code 210, single-family homes. What that is that the ITE, as I referenced before, compiles data. They compile actual traffic counts. So for instance, let's just say this development was open and operating and someone wanted to count the amount of traffic that was being generated by the development. They would count it in accordance with ITE methodology and submit that to ITE. He would take all of the single-family home developments, all of the data was collected and compile it and come up with equations and rates based on certain variables. As a traffic engineer, we utilize that information to project the amount of traffic a development will generate. So it's not a function of whether or not it's a 2-car garage or it's a 3-car garage or it's on-street parking. It's more a function of the type of use than anything else.
Like use of, like what use? What kind?
Single-family home.
I mean, it has to have a number attached to that, doesn't it, in order to calculate?
It calculates the number of trips associated with each single-family home. But it's not based on the number of garage doors. It's based on actual counts conducted. So someone goes out and counts a development that has 100 single-family homes. That development generates 1,000 trips. Take that data with the other traffic counts that were conducted at another 50-unit development. They take the traffic counts conducted with another 300-unit development. They compile it all, and they say, based on all of this data, a single-family home of this type, attached single-family home, will generate X amount of traffic per single-family home.
Any other questions?
Yep, I do.
Okay.
Thanks.
Hey, Matt, can you pull the mic up a little?
Does it count for additional vehicles other than the residents, like, for instance, school bus, Amazon deliveries, fuel oil deliveries, plumbers, electricians, and service people that come into the area?
So that's what the 804 daily trips.
That includes that?
It includes all of the traffic that would be associated with the proposed development.
Gotta say, that's a really low number, if, in my opinion. What about yours?
It's,
I mean,
Well-
you spent some time in our neighborhood, and you said at one point you saw 5 cars.
Mm-hmm.
I have 4 cars at my house, and my neighbors across the street have 4.
Wait, I think you were saying
Oh,
about
I'm
cars on the
thinking-
road, Matt? When you said you saw 5 cars, Jim, did you mean 5 cars parked or 5 cars driving?
5 cars driving.
Okay.
So then you talked about the stubs, and in your opinion, it was presumed or contemplated that the builder had in mind, back in the 70s, that they would probably put another development in there, correct?
Correct.
Well, there was a stub at Penfield, and there was a stub further at the other end of Leon.
Objection.
Yeah, you have to ask a question.
So.
Hang on, Donna. Donna, this is where,
Right, right,
Donna,
correct, right? Did you see that?
hang on,
Because-
Donna, please. When there's an objection, there needs to be a pause because I have to rule on it.
Oh, okay,
Okay,
sorry.
so she objected, I'm going to sustain it, and you're going to try again and put that right at the end, okay? But you
So-
have to wait if there's an objection. Okay, all right, I'll help.
Can I start again?
You can start again.
Okay. So the stubs being contemplated didn't happen the same way as your assumption would be, is that correct? Because there's the Pulte.
Hang on, you asked a question, correct?
Oh, yeah, I
Question-
did. I have
Okay,
to
now you have
stop.
to wait.
Okay, sorry.
All right. Did you understand the question?
I did not.
I didn't either.
Okay.
Can you try it again?
So you did a traffic study for Pulte's for the Del Webb.
Yes, ma'am.
And did you notice that Penfield Drive and Leon Drive stubbed to their property?
Yes, ma'am.
So.
I'm sorry, which property? Del Webb property or
Del
this
Webb,
property?
The Del
Okay,
Webb property,
Just wanted to clarify.
right?
Yes.
So assuming and contemplating that the builder in the 70s could be incorrect, right? That there would be a development in that field of 78 single homes, correct?
So all I'm aware of is there are multiple stubs off of Leon Drive serving adjacent undeveloped properties. One is the subject property where there's 2 stubs serving this property, Buckthorn Drive and Grapevine Drive. There are also 2 existing stubs further north at Leon and Penfield, which access the property in the area of the current Del Webb development. Difference with that property is that they had frontage, they being the Del Webb property, had frontage along a main roadway and chose to take access to that main roadway rather than connecting through the residential development. This property does not have that same ability. Their only access to and from vis-a-vis the Grapevine Drive stub, the Buckthorn Drive stub, the access easement that's been discussed at the southeast corner that ultimately accesses Orvilla Road.
Correct. When you looked around, though, did you try to figure out a better access to this development if it was going to be developed? Like to a major road like Orvilla Road?
No, I did not. So when I looked at this property, and I may have mentioned this, but I looked at this property when Pulte first brought it to me, and I looked at the access stubs. And again, I thought that this was the most appropriate access because at some point in the past, it appeared to me that someone had contemplated this property be serviced by one or both of those locations. So I would rather, as a traffic engineer, take access to A, what was previously planned, in my opinion, and B, a roadway of lesser classification so that I can continue to disperse that traffic before it gets to the roadways of higher classification, i.e. Coffle and Orvilla. I would also mention that if at some point there was the ability to take a direct access to Orvilla Road, if let's just say that there was a small sliver of property beyond just the easement that's currently contemplated, there was a small piece of property that would afford us the ability to take access to Orvilla Road, I would tell you in that location, it is unlikely that PennDOT would permit such an access point. For a number of reasons. That's a PennDOT roadway, so PennDOT ultimately has jurisdiction over the roadway. But according to PennDOT standards, PennDOT, when you have multiple frontages, they require that you to take access to the roadway as lesser for classification. They would have seen the access stub to Grapevine or to Buckthorn and would have said, we would prefer you take access to those locations, being that we don't want to introduce an additional access point on a roadway that carries significantly more traffic over the course of a day.
But aren't they going to be adding considerable access to that PennDOT road anyway?
Emergency access.
No, once they get out of, like, their development using Grapevine, they're gonna overpopulate Villa and Koffel because those are the two major roads, right?
I don't know what your definition of overpopulate. I would say that yes, we are adding traffic to those two roadways, but it is a minimal amount of traffic added to those roadways as compared to the amount of traffic currently on those roadways.
And my last question. Have you had an experience to study a very typical type of conditional use of a landlocked property coming out to a community?
I didn't hear the last part, it faded out.
That-
Has he ever studied land development for a community that comes out to a landlocked piece of property?
From a landlocked piece of property into an established community?
I don't know that I specifically been involved in a project of that nature. I do know that there's been many projects that I've seen that have occurred in my various capacities, whether it's through projects that my company has worked on or through various positions that I hold or have held in the development community, but I don't know that I've specifically worked on one that's been landlocked. But again, the difference here is that there are two access stubs that connect directly to the property, which would serve as the access to and from the development.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Donna?
My name is Victoria Camuso, C-A-M-U-S-O. I'm at 1619 Leon Drive. Okay. So you had mentioned that you had approximately 100 designs over the course of your career doing this type of work. And I'm curious if you designed Del Webb, the MacArthur Road project, or surrounding us.
I did not, you mean the Del Webb, yes. I was involved in the Del Webb project. The MacArthur Road project is the one directly north of the Del Webb project?
Yes.
I was not involved in that.
Are you involved with the Pulte development off of County Line Road in Warminster currently?
Action relevance.
Yeah, how's it relevant?
Well, all of these, my point is that they go on to major roadways. They have some situations where they're going out into a 5-lane
I'm going to object. I mean, she's testifying now.
Yeah, so.
Do any of the
hang on.
projects...
This is where we pause.
Okay.
Sustained. Now move on to your next question.
Do any of the projects surrounding our development let me start over. The county line, are you working on the County Line Road Pulte development in Warminster?
Again, objection, relevance.
Sustained. You have to move on to something that has to do with this project and this plan and something that he's testified to about this development.
The reason I'm asking the question is because all of these neighborhoods go into a major
Objection.
roadway.
Yeah. So, Victoria,
Yes.
at the end of this proceeding, you'll have the opportunity to make statements. And that's when you can tell the board what correlations they should make based on the testimony that you've heard. And then you can present what you think is relevant at that time through testimony. So right now, it has to be questions only, and it has to pertain to things that he's testified to. So take a look at your list of questions and see if you can find any that meet that criteria.
You stated that when you do the studies, they are projected to what you believe is with the design of the property that you're working on. Do you go back later and look at what you thought was going to happen to see if the traffic conditions, et cetera, met your belief in the beginning?
In certain instances, yes, we have.
Do you find that they are, sorry, I can't see. Do you find that they are accurate, or are they off? Like, I'm not the expert. I'm trying to understand if how you project them in the beginning of a project is actually what it looks like at the end.
So it's a tough question to answer, and the reason for that is that there are many different things that can change over the course of a project's timeline, and from when the project is first conceived, project is fully built out and occupied. There are a number of different variables that can occur, other developments in the area, additional projects that just were unknown at the time that could affect the traffic patterns in the area. So there's a lot of things that could go into it that we don't have control over and just can't predict. But in the instances where we've gone back and looked at how the amount of traffic a development generates versus what we projected, say more often than not, the amount of traffic is lower than what we projected. And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of different layers that go into the Exhibit A14, into that traffic study. There's certain criteria that we must meet to satisfy not only the township ordinances, but typically PennDOT requirements. So when we're layering in traffic associated with other developments, we're layering in growth in traffic, just general growth in traffic that occurs, and plus a number of other items, we tend to be overestimating the amount of traffic. It's not to say that there aren't instances where we've underestimated the amount of traffic, but I would tell you it's not an exact science. And traffic can fluctuate on a daily basis. I'm sure you've all experienced that before, where Monday you have no problem getting to the grocery store, and on Tuesday around the same time it's a little bit harder. So traffic can fluctuate on a regular basis, and a traffic study is not meant to look at the worst case of the worst case. It's meant to look at typical conditions on the roadway network, and knowing that traffic can fluctuate 5 to 10% on a given day.
You mentioned that every project has a safety rating, A being great, F being the worst. What do you rate this design?
So just to be clear, it's not a safety rating. It's called level of service. And really what level of service is a measure of delay. So we grade intersections by the amount of delay incurred at that intersection. Level of service A is the best, right? Just like grades in school. A being the best means minimal amount of delay that occurs. Level of service F is the worst, means a lot of congestion, a lot of delay. It takes you longer to get through that intersection. That's how we grade intersections. So it's not necessarily a matter of safety, but more so the amount of delay at an intersection. There's two components of level of service. One is how the intersection operates. Right? Take into account, if it's a four-way intersection, you take into account each of the four legs, delay, and determine how that intersection operates from a level of service perspective. But then you also look at the individual approaches to that intersection. Right? So you look at the intersection and you look at the approaches. Those are all certain conditions or certain criteria that we must analyze and look at. For purposes of the traffic study that was done, the intersections of Leon Drive and Orvilla Road, of Coffle Road and Sourwood, and Leon Drive and Grapevine Drive, overall operate at a level of service A as an apple. Now, within those 3 intersections, there are certain movements that operate below a level of service A, level of service B, a level of service C, but generally the intersection itself operates with minimal delay. The intersection of Villa Road and Colville Road is a different story, where there are level of service Ds, as in dog, on certain approaches. The overall intersection operates at a level of service B in the morning peak hour and a level of service C the PM peak hour. So what that means, and it's obvious to anyone who drives through that intersection, there's more delay at that intersection over the course during those peak hours, those peak time periods than there are at those other 3 intersections I mentioned.
So you're saying anywhere from an A to a D?
Saying
The D was Orvilla and Koffel, B being in the morning, C in the peak hours, and then you mentioned something about an overall A when you stated the beginning of that.
correct. I said there's 2 components to when we look at intersection. One is how the overall intersection operates. Those are all the first 3 intersections I mentioned, Orvilla and Leon, Hopeful and Sourwood, Leon and Grapevine. Those intersections themselves operate a level of service A as an apple. The intersection of Orvilla and Colville Road operates anywhere between a level of service B and a level of service C during those peak periods.
Okay.
My name is Christine Delongis, Delongis. I live at 1608 Leon Drive. Christine, Christine. My first question is, how many developments has your company done where there's been over 70 units and they only have one entrance and exit point, and that happens to be another neighborhood?
I don't know that I can put a number on that. We've worked on thousands of projects in the 35 years we've been in business. I don't know that I could put a number on the amount of developments that we've worked on, over 70 units with one point of ingress and egress.
It would be nice to know.
So what I can tell you is they do exist, and they do exist in this immediate area. So there are developments of 70 residential units or more that are accessed via one ingress and egress. Now, not necessarily through neighborhood roadways. But they are accessed through one ingress and egress.
Okay, my question was just into a neighborhood. I
don't know
care
that I have the answer to
Yeah,
for
to
that.
go out to a main road would be great. To go into our neighborhood is not so great. Next question.
Okay,
Next
Christine?
question. Sorry, I'm going to
Yep,
stop
please
doing
don't
that.
testify, just ask questions, and you have to, hang on, you can't talk over each other. So
Okay.
really, when he's talking, just,
Be quiet.
thank you.
Besides the study, have you ever gone at peak period and tried to get onto Orvilla Road from Leon?
I have.
And how'd that go at peak time?
I don't know that it was an unusual circumstance as it relates to the amount of traffic anticipated in those areas.
Well, do you know that there are times when I've done it and I've waited for 10 minutes?
Objection.
It was a question.
I do not.
Testifying.
My last question is, would you be okay for you and your family to live at the Stub and Grapevine? Would you be happy with that?
I don't know that I don't know that I'd be unhappy. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of criteria that would go into my family and I's decision on where to move, but I don't know that that particular instance would sway me one way or another.
One last question. Why did you not look at Orvilla and Welsh Road?
Because the amount of traffic we anticipate actually accessing that intersection as it's dispersed throughout would be such that would not require us to look at that intersection, nor would I anticipate there to be a significant impact from this development.
Okay. One more question. Do you think if you did the study on June 5th, you would get a different outcome than you did on March 5th? You did the study on March 5th.
Hang on, pause.
Okay.
Think you would have a different result in your study if you did it in June than you did in March?
It depends, was school still in session June 5th?
Well, let's say June 11th. School's out.
Yes, it would likely experience less traffic on the roadway.
But more children. Thanks.
My name is Deborah Kimball, Kimball. Deborah, Deborah. I live at 1551 Leon Drive. Regarding the March 7th study, do you also record what the weather was like at that particular time? What was the temperature during your time? Was there precipitation? What was going on that day?
I do.
Okay.
And I have the official weather report
Okay.
for that day of
Okay.
March 7th. The high that day was 57, the low was 52, humidity was 92%, and there was anywhere between 1 to 10 mile an hour or 11 mile an hour winds that day.
All right. Was it sunny or precipitation?
It was there was light rain
Okay.
at
Do you,
some point, but other
Fine.
than that, it was relatively clear.
do you think that that would have a effect on how many pedestrians were in the area while you were counting?
The temperature may have.
All right, you said your traffic study, you don't think that it would, the 800 cars coming through the neighborhood would impact any health or safety to the neighborhood. If you look at Grapevine Drive, there are 2 driveways right up to the stump. How does that make a positive impact on those 2 residents? One who has a handicapped child. How is that making their life better? Having 800 cars.
Hang on, you got to stop. That was 3. So ask your question, 1, and then you got to give them a chance to answer.
All right.
So the question that you should answer is the first one about, is there a positive impact on those 2 driveways as a result of this development?
I'm not aware of any positive impact on those 2 existing driveways.
All right. Would there be negative impacts to those 2 driveways with 800 cars coming past?
Depends on what your definition of negative, but obviously adding additional additional traffic along the roadway in that area could be a negative impact on those, their ability to enter and exit their current driveways. But I would point out, there's driveways are on the stub, which, again, in my opinion, was anticipated to be a vehicular access serving this development, which could be developed in a multitude of ways.
Well, speaking of the stumps, if you, how much time have you spent in our neighborhood looking at the stumps? How many visits?
4 or 5 visits?
Okay. There's houses on Grapevine and on Buckthorn. The way they're oriented, their driveways are on the stump.
Yes.
What makes you think that that the builder was worried about what you wanted to do 50 years later?
Because I have seen this type of planning going into developments in the past where the municipality, the developer, maybe the developer had the property under agreement, where they've contemplated providing access to a certain property. It's not unusual for that to occur, and is actually, there's probably a number of planners out there would say that it is actually proper planning to try to interconnect parcels of property before introducing additional access points on main roadways.
So you think the driveways where they're placed was just a fantasy, or?
I think their driveways were a result of having the ability to construct 2 additional homes, which would not front on Leon Drive. Therefore, they took access to the stub.
Well, never mind, that's, what makes you feel like, because we have a low-volume neighborhood, that it is okay for you to flood us with 800 cars, additional cars in our neighborhood?
The zoning ordinance?
Okay. All right. I have more to testify.
Thank you.
Thomas Deller, 1526 Leon Drive.
What's your name again?
Thomas Deller,
Spell your last name, Thomas.
D as in David, Eller. With the proposed 800, well, not proposed, but anyhow, the 800 additional cars, what would that look like if we had no development? Do you know what that number is now without any development?
I do.
Also,
So I can speak to those intersections that I talked about. So I can specifically speak the amount of traffic that accesses or travels through the intersection of Leon Drive and Grapevine Drive today.
okay, would you please?
One second to add this up. So currently, based on those traffic counts conducted during the AM peak hour, and I talked about that one highest hour of traffic in the morning, 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., about 16 vehicles traveling through that intersection over the course of an hour. The PM peak hour, approximately 30 vehicles are traveling through that intersection over the course of a 1 hour time period.
And as far as so we're saying now that with the cluster development going in, there would be potentially 800 vehicles going through that intersection?
Over the course of 24 hours.
Right.
Right, so I don't have the specific numbers of the amount of traffic that would traverse through Grapevine and Leon today over the course of a 24-hour period. I'm just speaking of peak hours.
If this were not a cluster development, if it were a full half-acre lots or three-quarter-acre lots, similar to the existing development around the Pulte proposed property, do we have any numbers of what the vehicle traffic would be, or?
I don't know how many units would be developed based on your specific scenario, but as I mentioned earlier, the site is zoned to allow, through special exception, a number of uses that would likely, based on the size of the property, excuse me, that would likely generate more traffic than 804 trips over the course of a day.
I guess additional question is, has anyone looked at the impact to Vine Street across Coffle, knowing that that's another route out to Cowpath?
I have not.
That will also be impacted by this development.
Just questions, Thomas. Are y'all done?
Sorry, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Good evening. Nicholas Oropeza, Oropeza.
Address, Nicholas?
500 Grapevine Drive. I'm that guy, Matt. Yeah, so I'm the last house where the stub meets. So my question would be, Matt, you said you spent 4 to 5 days in the neighborhood.
4 to 5 visits, not days, but yes.
How many hours would that equate to?
In total?
Yes.
Maybe 2.
2 hours. And when you state the stub for Grapevine Drive, in your professional opinion, was put there for development, do you believe there's any other use for that?
There may be. My opinion, though, based on my experience and what I've seen in the past, and constructing a road fully to the property line as an extension of an existing roadway to me, in my opinion, is as a result of someone planning to provide access to the subject property.
Right. And do you know who uses that?
Who uses?
Who uses the land down that road?
I do not.
Do not. That's because a farmer does. So is it
Nicholas?
possible?
Nicholas,
Okay.
first of all, I need you to back off the mic. You're actually too loud. Everybody else isn't loud enough. But you are like,
I don't
you
have to
are
use the mic.
aggressive with the microphone.
Sorry.
So do me a favor, I need you to take a breath.
Yeah.
Take a breath and ask your next question, but
Sure.
no statements, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you know if a farmer uses the land there?
I do not.
You know what is planted there?
I do not.
So is it possible that a farmer has access through that road and that the developer developed it so that the farmer would have access points? Is that possible?
It is a possibility. However, I would be surprised that he would provide the farmer with 2 stub roadways to the property line based on the cost of those roadways. However, it's a possibility.
So you're just speculating about why they were there. You have no firsthand knowledge of the developer and the farmer's agreement.
I do not. Again, I think everything that I've said so far tonight is based on my opinion and my experience of what I've seen in the past.
No further questions.
Thank you.
Jignesh Patel. Jignesh, Jignesh.
Your address, Mr. Patel?
1582 Leon Drive. I'm the other guy on the corner.
1580 Leon, right?
82.
1582. Great, thank you. What's your question?
804 trip means 804 cars or 804 trips twice?
It's easiest way to go about it is 402 cars twice.
402 cars.
Because there's going to be, yes, there are going to be trips in and out, FedEx, school buses, but that one trip in is that same, another trip out. Right? So say 402 vehicles.
Okay. What? And these are within the 24 hours, right?
Sorry?
804 cars within the 24 hours.
804 trips over the course of 24 hours, yes.
What's the maximum, during the day, what's the maximum time car travels on the road? How many hours cars travel during the 24 hours on the roads?
Objection. I'm not even sure I understand the question.
I don't understand it either. So let's try again. So his testimony was there's 804 trips within a 24-hour period. So what's your question based on that?
How many car drives in during the daytimes and how many car drives during the nighttime?
Okay. Do you know that answer, Matt?
I don't, however, what I would say is that when I speak of the peak hours, we're looking at the peak amount of traffic that we would anticipate to not only enter and exit the development, but also be traveling on the roadways. So that does not mean that there isn't additional traffic, obviously traveling in other time periods. But I would say the majority of traffic would likely be traveling in and out of this development anywhere between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m.
What if you add another access to the major roads, such as Orvilla, Bells Road, or anywhere, any possibility? I don't know what possible thing to connect those roads, but is there any way? And does that affect the traffic on 804 cars on a one point?
I'm not aware of the ability to connect to any other roads than what's currently shown. And just let me clarify, to connect to any other roads for vehicular traffic, obviously there's a connection via Orvilla Road. Not aware of any other areas that we can connect to any other roadways other than what's currently shown on Exhibit 8.
You say you put the cameras for counting a traffic study, right? how long does it put a camera for, like, what's the duration of the time you put the camera for each intersections?
So it really depends on the use, the area, and the requirements in various municipalities and the state. Purpose, we recorded 12 hours of data at each one of those.
I wrote it everywhere, so I gotta find my questions. You said you visited 4 or 5 times. One day you saw only 5 cars on your visit.
Yes.
You'd be surprised to see the 804 car and 5 cars. You'd be surprised.
Sorry, I don't know
Like,
that I understand.
You waited, how long do you waited for the one visit?
So I was there, I would have to guess, maybe 20 minutes or so, and I saw approximately 5 cars driving along Leon Drive at a vicinity of Grapevine Drive.
805 divided by 12 is, I would say, about 20 minutes. Would it be possible, based on your count, it could be around 30 cars? That's what I'm thinking.
So if there were 79 PM peak hour trips and over 20, the course of 20 minutes, somewhere in the range of 5 to 27.
Surprised then? 5 and 25 numbers?
Would I be
So the
surprised?
5 cars during your visit, and if you see the 25 cars on your study, would you be surprised with that number?
Dan, I apologize.
Okay. My question is, do you think this is safe? Not the safe, but like, cannot explain. I got to think about something. So maybe next time I'll. You said traffic from the Grapevine and the Leon Drive is going to divert into like 4 different intersections. Penfield, Brighton, Sourwood, and Leon to Orvilla. Yes?
Yes.
You put another access on the Buckthorn. Would that traffic be divert from the Grapevine to the Buckthorn?
There was another vehicular access at Buckthorn. It would divert, obviously, traffic from Grapevine and Leon to Buckthorn and Leon, excuse me. But it would only divert that traffic within a short distance. Ultimately, west of Buckthorn and east of Grapevine would look no different at those 2 access points than having the singular access point
Right.
opposite Grapevine.
My concern is I'm living at the corner and I'm going to see the 804 cars right there on the Grapevine. Right now, I'm seeing only 5 cars a day. That's my concern. If you were staying at my place there where I'm living, would you be happy with that?
So, well, let me.
Wait, which part is he having? No, I mean staying with you or watching cars?
Yeah, you can.
Just to clarify, I believe your statement was just, I see 5 cars a day and you're proposing 804. My testimony was, there was 5 cars I observed on my one visit in a 20-minute period. I was asked a question about the amount of traffic currently accessing that intersection. 16 trips in the morning peak hour and 30 trips in the afternoon peak hour. So there's significantly more traffic than 5 trips over the course of a day at that intersection. But I don't know that I could answer if I'm happy or not with respect to living there. It's a function of what you enjoy versus what I enjoy. I live in an area where I decided that was the appropriate location for my family and I. I don't know what your decision was, but.
Okay, I understand.
Else, Mr. Patel?
I think that should be right. I will do the statement later on.
Okay, great, thank you.
Rick Vasso.
Spell your last name, Rick?
V as in Victory, ASSO.
Your address.
1559 Leon Drive. I'm the other guy's neighbor.
The other guy.
Both the other guys.
The other guy.
I'm curious to know, would the traffic assessment would be different if the property had access to a major road, a non-tertiary road, I think was this, as Leon Drive, Grapevine Drive were described. If the property had an access to Orvilla Road, for example, would the assessment of the 402 cars, 804 trips be different?
If the access to a main way appropriately and met the criteria, whether it's a township road, then yes, it would have different.
Think the results would be higher or lower?
There would be no difference in the amount of traffic generated. It would be a matter of dispersing the traffic into different manners currently proposed.
My next question is, given the fact that the development, the property to the north and east of it, that's undeveloped, and the property that is to the south of it, that's undeveloped, given the fact that those two properties, as I understand, are zoned for residential, in your opinion, would you recommend that developer add stub roads or other things for potential future development, given the fact that those properties butt up against main roads at PennDOT would probably not allow for an access point to?
I have made no such recommendation in relation to properties that you've referenced. Difficult to tell where exactly those properties on the south side go. I do know some of those properties front Welsh Road, so that would give them the ability to access Welsh Road directly. But I have not made any recommendations with providing any stub roads.
But if they can't dump out into a major road and those properties get developed, would they not need to connect to this new property to get out and access all of those major roads?
I'm not aware of that property that you referenced in the northeast corner. I'm not aware of that tax parcel or where that property line. So I can't, but in terms of that property on the northeast.
Matt's referencing the aerial photo that is A5, I believe it was, maybe A4.
Okay, Matt, you got to get on the mic, though.
Trying to read it, sorry. In regards to that property on the northeast corner you referenced, I'm looking at exhibit A4, and I believe, I can't tell 100%, but I believe that property has a portion of frontage along Orvilla Road. They would have the ability to take a direct access to Orvilla Road, and it looks like in a location opposite Coventry Drive.
Okay, fair enough. But I guess my question is, given you made a point that, in your opinion, the current development, the current neighborhood, had stub roads put in potentially for future development, and given that future development is here, wouldn't it be prudent for this development to think about the future and put in something to provide access points for those other properties, mainly, potentially the property to the south of it?
I'm going to say not after what I've heard the last 2 hours. But no, in all honesty, it's not necessary. I don't know the parameters with respect to that northeast property, and I don't know the parameters of those properties that you referenced to the south. So it would really be dependent upon those properties and what they would be developed as and where they would take access. But again, I think at least for that property in the northeast, that has frontage along Orvilla Road and would likely be able to take direct access to Orvilla Road.
Thank you.
You at 600 Brighton Drive.
I'm sorry, last name, Susan?
Donahue,
Your address again.
600 Brighton Drive. I apologize if I mention anything. Unfortunately, the change of meeting conflicted with my vacation, so I arrived late, and I apologize if I say anything that you've covered, but I have two questions. One is whether you mentioned or can address for us the impact on the construction traffic on establishing this development. How does construction traffic influence that impact into the picture?
I don't know, so it's not necessarily something I typically address. It is something that is discussed through the land development process. So if this project were fortunate enough to move through the conditional use hearing, approval, and move on to land development, something that may be discussed during that time, and would likely have to address any applicable township requirements, but it's not something that I normally take into account.
There's no information or data right now on establishment of this and how that will impact the residents at all.
Correct.
And then my second question is about, you mentioned, I think you were saying something like 46 cars passing through on those peak hours around Grapevine. About the right number?
16 in the morning and 30 in the afternoon.
About
Peaks.
46. So we're talking about almost like a 94% increase of traffic.
Hang on, you have to stay close to the mic too, because
I
you're
know,
fading
sorry.
out.
Too
So
hard-
you just
too
added
hard
the-
of a vacation, apparently.
Hang on a minute. So you added the AM peak traffic to the PM peak traffic?
Yeah, so if you're saying am I understanding that correctly? So you're saying about 46 in total in the two peak periods, is that right? Added together?
That's correct.
Okay.
However, I'm not adding those together. So there would be an increase in the morning traffic. As currently exists at that intersection, we recorded about 16 vehicles traveling through that intersection during the peak period. I'd mentioned that the development will generate 59 new trips. So that intersection would actually experience somewhere about 100% increase in traffic during the AM peak hour, based on what exists today. And I don't necessarily like to talk about percentages, because when you have such a low number to begin with, 16 trips in an hour is extremely low. So even if I were to add 16 trips, I've increased it by 100%.
Right, but it is
16
a
trips is not significant.
dramatic increase.
Hang on, you can't talk over each other.
Sorry.
So 16 trips, in my opinion, is not significant. But regardless, we would anticipate there'd be 59 new trips in the morning peak hour added to that intersection. And in the PM peak hour, 79 new trips, where there's currently approximately 30.
So in one of the previous questions, you were talking about your house and how you would feel if you chose a certain house for that. And do you feel that the decisions you made on buying your house were solely based on the price of your house? Or do you feel like there's other aspects of your house that really provide value to why you made that choice?
I would objection. Okay. Yeah, that's
waiting.
sustained. That's outside of his area of expertise. He's a traffic engineer. You have to ask him traffic questions, not real estate questions.
Okay.
All right, try another one. Do you have
Yes.
anything else, Susan?
I guess not directly for you, but then maybe to the other. Are we going to have a real estate person come as a witness to
That's
talk
up to
about
the,
that?
That's up to the applicant. So far, I haven't seen one, so we're just on traffic right now.
Okay. Okay. Then.
All right.
All my
Any other questions for the traffic engineer?
Yeah, that's all.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, I see no one else at the podium. We are at 9:28. What do you want to do?
I just have two redirect questions, that's all, two, promise.
You're not limited to two. You
I
can
know.
have as many as you want.
So Matt, you heard some concerns about that the traffic would solely be leaving the development onto Grapevine Drive. From a traffic design perspective, is there any reason why Buckthorn Drive couldn't also be made a main access similar to Grapevine Drive?
So if Buckthorn Drive was converted from an emergency access to a vehicular access,
Correct.
don't see a reason why that could not happen.
So there could be 2 full movement accesses from this property, correct?
Correct. Currently proposed Grapevine Drive vis-à-vis the extension, and a second vehicular access on Buckthorn Drive, again, vis-à-vis the extension.
Okay. And is it your understanding that if the Board of Commissioners preferred a second full movement access be provided, that applicant would agree as a condition of approval if the application is favorably looked upon by the board, that the applicant would make Buckthorn Drive a full movement access?
My understanding that they could propose Buckthorn Drive as a second main access to and from the development.
That's all I have.
Any questions based on that redirect, Tom?
Yes, so, Mr. Hammond, do you understand a 50-foot right-of-way is required for?
Yes.
And that therefore you would either lose a lot or have to realign lots, yes?
I can't answer that.
That's a Mr. Bazunas question?
That is a Mr. Bazunas question.
That's all I have.
Any questions on that redirect?
None on that, just a simple calculation, because I just want to make sure I got my numbers right on the peak number. The weekday AM peak, 59 new trips, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what is the existing number of trips now?
Existing number of trips at that intersection, at the intersection of Grapevine and Leon, is 16.
We get it's 59 plus 16.
Yes, sir.
So for the weekday peak hours, AM peak, thank you, total additional trips is 79.
Correct.
And the current number is what?
30.
Whatever 79 and 30 is.
109. Yes.
Notice he's not on mic as he says that.
What did I say?
Yes.
Not specific to the redirect.
I would object at this point. I mean, we've already been through.
Well, he's a commissioner. I think we'll give him a little latitude. Let's see what he asks, and then.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
For clarification, the data you're using was formulated from some time period. Do you know what time period? 1980, 1990?
I don't know the specific time periods of the, and I assume the data you're referring to is the amount of the trip generation?
Yes, yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you, though, that it is based on the latest edition of the trip generation manual, which, I apologize, I get confused sometimes. 11th edition, which was published in 2021. It was prior to COVID.
And cameras, the 12 hours, that was for one day? It was from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.? Or is it?
One day.
One day, okay.
6:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m.
And you said disbursement. You didn't count Orville and Welsh because of disbursement. How do you determine which direction a car may go to? Did you collect on actual data and just extrapolating that?
It's based on the actual data and the specific use. So because this is a residential neighborhood, we would expect that other residences would likely follow the same kind of patterns. It would be different if it was obviously a commercial type use. But because it's a residential use and are surrounded by a residential community, we would anticipate similar type travel patterns.
Factoring in, hey, these guys currently go here and just multiply it. All right, thank you.
I just have one question. I think it's a.
But this is
All right, let's.
what occurs.
She has a point that we're not supposed to reinvent, but go ahead.
No, so this
We'll see
is-
what he says.
You addressed about the double access, using other road as an access as well. Just talked about that 2
Yes.
minutes ago.
Buckthorn, you mean?
Oh, yeah, Buckhorn. So In talking about the two access, having two access all night long, yet your study only shows one.
I believe my testimony all night long has been only one access point.
No, you said there's only one access point, but you related a lot of your comments to two access. That's probably why they had the stub there. That's why they had everything to develop that property, all that stuff. So, you know, and then you talked a lot about dispersing traffic. So certainly two access roads would disperse traffic a lot quicker than just one.
So it would,
So
but
why
however.
is there no
Come on, you gotta
recommendation?
let's let him answer. Go ahead.
So it would, if you had two vehicular access points serving the community, expect that there would be a portion of the vehicular traffic accessing Grapevine to now utilize Buckthorn. But what I was saying earlier was that when you get west of Buckthorn or east of Grapevine, there will be no discernible difference in the analysis that we've already conducted because those access points are closely spaced. I believe the distance between Buckthorn and Grapevine is somewhere in the 350-foot, 375-foot range. So because you're coming out to to Leon, instead of having one, you have two. They're all essentially going the same direction. So you would expect there to be a disbursement directly at that access point. Once you're immediately west or immediately east, there would be
That's very similar to the roads that lead out to Coffle, right? I mean, they're not that far apart either. You have four accesses going out to Coffle Road.
correct.
You use that to disperse traffic. So again, all the traffic is going to still filter into one road.
Difference is that you have the ability to disperse traffic to four locations in an area, whereas we really only have the ability to disperse traffic onto Leon Drive and then onto other tertiary roadways.
Wondering why the 78 houses doesn't have two.
I couldn't hear that.
But,
Get close to the mic, Bob.
Yeah, so I'm just, so you use that analogy for the four roads going into Coffle Road. But the same thing would apply for 78, or the number of 400 trips, 800 trips a day going in and out of this community. I would think that the proposal would be more along the line that you have two access roads into this place. Development.
Well, I think that's what Matt had mentioned when he said that the developer would agree to make Buckthorn full access drive.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why that wasn't thought of before we came here.
So the reason why it wasn't thought of, it really comes down to Grapevine Drive and my opinion and my thoughts as to the appropriate access location. Grapevine Drive is a four-way intersection. It already has the fourth leg of that intersection. Granted, there are two homes that access the stub of Grapevine Drive, but it is a four-way intersection. So anyone exiting out of the proposed development would have the ability to continue straight through and maybe utilize Apple Blossom or whatnot, Sourwood to get to Coffle, or they could come out and make a right or a left on the Leon Drive. Proposing an access point on Buckthorn, you're actually taking an existing T intersection for all intents and purposes and adding more traffic to the T. There's an existing home directly opposite Buckthorn Drive that would likely be the recipient of headlights and the like for vehicles exiting out of the residential development, whereas you don't have that on Grapevine Drive. So it was a matter of looking at the available access to the property and what, in my opinion, felt was the most appropriate from a traffic perspective, which is why we chose Grapevine. If ultimately, at the end of the day, the decision makers felt that a second access point was appropriate and that access point was Buckthorn Drive, I believe the applicant would accept that. I think it would have more of a negative impact on some of the residents there, most specifically the resident directly opposite, but it's not something that would have a significant change or impact to the analyses or my conclusions to date.
For clarification, you were brought in after the design was done, right? You didn't have input where that would go.
I did.
You did have input after the
I
design
believe
was done?
I believe, as I mentioned, I don't have the specific time frame of when I was engaged. I believe it was sometime in later 2023. I did not start to conduct my analyses, the traffic study analysis, until obviously March. But there was significant involvement by myself in the planning process and determining where those access points were.
Thank you.
So we've reached the hour, I think, that we're done for
Yes.
tonight. We spoke about scheduling another hearing. Do you have another witness?
I do.
Okay.
One, definitely, maybe a second, but
Mind you?
he would be the next witness, that's correct.
Okay. So we talked about dates before we got here so we could speed this along, and we looked at Wednesday, July 17, as an appropriate date, 7 o'clock. Board members, all okay with that? As far as the room availability? Julie, you and your client are
That's
agreeable to that date? Tom
Yes.
Panzer, you two are agreeable? Okay. So a motion would be in order to continue this hearing until Wednesday, July 17, 7 p.m. prevailing time. There will be no further ads, no further notices. Is there such a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. Thank you. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.